The night shift at Belmore Tower had been posted for 16 days. 23 workers had seen the listing. Not one had accepted. Nathan Cole stood in the temp agency's waiting room, staring at the printout while his daughter's voice echoed from that morning. "Daddy, why do you always pick the hardest jobs?" He didn't have an answer she would understand. The shift paid time and a half. The building was a 72-story glass monument on the edge of downtown Chicago, owned by one of the youngest billionaires in America, and the last 3 security guards assigned to the overnight had all quit within a week. Somewhere in a corner office, 40 floors above where Nathan would walk his rounds, Victoria Ashford signed off on a stack of personnel reports without reading the names. The night shift was a line item, nothing more. Belmore Tower rose into the Chicago night like a blade of light and steel, its glass facade reflecting the scattered glow of the city below. Nathan clocked in at 11:15, finding the security desk empty, except for a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and a logbook with entries that grew increasingly sparse over the past month. The lobby stretched out before him in polished marble and carefully arranged silence, designed to impress visitors who would never see it like this, hollow and echoing in the small hours when the cleaners had finished and the executives had gone home to their lives. He collected the keycard and radio from the desk drawer, checked the battery on his flashlight, and began the first of what would be 12 rounds through the building's lower floors. The assignment sheet listed specific checkpoints, fire exits, and mechanical rooms. But what it didn't mention was the feeling of walking through a space built for thousands while being the only heartbeat in it. The HVAC system hummed somewhere in the walls, and the elevators chimed softly at random intervals as if the building were having dreams. Nathan had worked security before, years ago, when his wife was still alive, and Lily was just a toddler with a laugh that could fill their small apartment. That was before the medical bills and the funeral costs and the slow unraveling of everything he thought was permanent. Now he took whatever shifts the agency offered, piecing together enough hours to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator and his daughter in a school that still believed in her future, even when he wasn't sure he believed in his own. His phone buzzed at midnight, and Nathan stepped into a stairwell to check the message. A photo from Mrs. Delgado, the neighbor who watched Lily on nights like this. His daughter was asleep on the couch, her math homework spread across the coffee table, a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm that she claimed she was too old for but couldn't sleep without. Beneath the photo was a voice message, and Nathan pressed play with the volume low. "Hi, Daddy. Mrs. Delgado said I could stay up until you texted goodnight, but I got too sleepy. I hope your new job is okay. I know you're working really hard for us. I love you. See you in the morning." Nathan saved the message and listened to it once more before pocketing his phone. The building felt different after that, less empty somehow. He carried his daughter's voice with him like a lantern through the long corridors, checking locks and testing doors, doing the job no one else had wanted because someone had to do it, and he had stopped waiting for easy a long time ago. The upper floors were different from the lobby, less polished, more functional, filled with server rooms and mechanical systems that required regular monitoring. Nathan made his way through them methodically, noting temperatures on cooling units, checking for warning lights on electrical panels, doing the work that the building's daytime staff took for granted. Everything ran on routine here, on the assumption that systems would keep functioning because they had functioned yesterday and the day before that. No one questioned. No one looked too closely. The building operated on institutional momentum rather than genuine oversight, and Nathan could feel the difference in the way dust had accumulated in corners, in the way certain doors stuck slightly, as if they hadn't been opened in weeks, in the way the silence seemed to carry the weight of things left unexamined. By 2 inches the morning, he had covered 40 floors and found nothing unusual. By 3, he was beginning to understand why the previous guards had quit. The isolation was oppressive, the silence almost physical. It pressed against his ears and made every small sound feel significant. At 3:47, Nathan found the first sign of something wrong. He was on the 58th floor, checking a mechanical room that housed part of the building's fire suppression system, when he noticed the pressure gauge on the main water line. The needle was sitting at 40% below normal operating range, which meant that if a fire broke out anywhere in the upper 20 floors, the sprinklers would engage but deliver barely enough water to slow the flames, let alone extinguish them. Nathan checked the backup gauge. He checked the maintenance log posted on the wall and found entries going back 3 months. All of them signed off as normal by technicians whose initials he didn't recognize. Someone had been lying for weeks, possibly months. Someone had been documenting normal readings on a system that was critically compromised, signing their initials on forms that could mean the difference between life and death. Nathan didn't know if it was laziness or negligence or something more deliberate, but what he knew was that 5,000 people worked in this building during business hours. Secretaries and executives and maintenance workers and cafeteria staff, people with families who expected them to come home at the end of the day, people who trusted that the building keeping them safe was actually safe. None of them had any idea that the fire safety system protecting them was operating at less than half capacity. None of them knew that the alarms might work perfectly, but the water that was supposed to follow might arrive too little, too late. He pulled out his radio and called down to the building management office. No answer, just static and silence. He tried the emergency maintenance line listed on the wall beneath a plastic cover that hadn't been removed in so long it had yellowed at the edges. The number rang 12 times before going to a generic voicemail that sounded like it hadn't been checked in weeks. He found the building manager's after-hours contact in the security binder and called that too. A woman's voice answered on the 4th ring, groggy and irritated. "This is Nathan Cole, overnight security at Billionaire Tower. I found a serious problem with the fire suppression system on the upper floors. The pressure is dangerously low. This needs immediate attention. The fire system was inspected last month." "It's fine. I'm looking at the gauges right now. They're showing 40% below normal. If there's a fire, look, I don't know what you think you're seeing, but our systems are inspected quarterly by certified technicians. If there was a problem, they would have caught it." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had hardened. "You're new, aren't you? Let me give you some advice. The night shift is simple. Walk your rounds, sign the logs, go home in the morning. Don't create problems that aren't there. It makes everyone's job harder, including yours." The line went dead. Nathan stood alone in the mechanical room, surrounded by equipment worth millions of dollars, staring at a gauge that could mean the difference between life and death for thousands of people, and wondered what exactly he was supposed to do now. The building manager's words echoed in his head as he continued his rounds. Don't create problems that aren't there. It was the same advice he'd received at half the jobs he'd worked over the past 3 years. Keep your head down. Don't make waves. Be grateful for the paycheck and don't ask questions that might make someone uncomfortable. It was good advice for survival. It was terrible advice for conscience. Nathan thought about Lily asleep on Mrs. Delgado's couch with her math homework and her rabbit. He thought about what he would tell her if she asked why he hadn't done anything. If someday there was a fire and people got hurt and the news showed pictures of the building he had walked through on the night when everything could have been prevented. He thought about the voice message she had left him, about working hard, about doing the right thing even when no one was watching. He made a choice. The next 90 minutes were the most focused of Nathan's professional life. He moved through the upper floors with a purpose that had nothing to do with his job description. Driven by something that felt almost like anger, but was closer to clarity, he documented everything, photographing the pressure gauges from multiple angles, recording video of the maintenance logs with their falsified entries, taking notes on every system he could find that connected to the fire suppression network. His handwriting was careful, precise, the same way he'd once filled out job applications and medical forms and all the other paperwork that had defined his life since everything fell apart. He accessed the building's service records through a terminal in the maintenance office using the generic login credentials posted on a sticky note beside the keyboard. Because apparently no one had ever imagined that a night security guard might care enough to look, what he found made his stomach drop further. The pressure problem wasn't isolated to one floor. It affected the entire upper third of the building, everything above the 50th floor, including the executive suite where Victoria Ashford and her senior leadership team worked every day. 22 floors of compromised fire protection. Thousands of people who came to work every morning, trusting that someone somewhere was paying attention. At 4:30, Nathan made a decision that would either save lives or end his career in building security permanently. He located the manual override for the building's fire alert system and triggered a Level 2 notification, the kind that didn't activate sprinklers or trigger evacuation, but did create an official incident report that would be automatically forwarded to the city fire marshal's office at the start of business. He logged the action in the security system under his own name and credentials. He wrote a detailed summary of his findings and emailed it to every address he could find in the building's emergency contact database. He was thorough. He was careful. He left no room for anyone to claim they hadn't been informed. Then he sat down in the security office, pulled out his phone, and listened to Lily's voice message 3 more times while waiting for the sun to come up. Her voice was small and sleepy and full of trust, and it reminded him why he had done what he'd just done. Not for recognition, not for reward, for the simple reason that somewhere in this building there were probably other fathers and mothers who wanted to come home to their children, too. His shift ended at 7 inches the morning. Nathan signed out in the logbook, gathered his jacket, and walked through the employee entrance into the pale gray light of a Chicago dawn. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. The morning shift security guard nodded as they passed each other in the doorway, already focused on the day ahead, unaware that the building's fire system was compromised or that an official report was about to land on the fire marshal's desk. Nathan took the LRA back to his neighborhood, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He had done something that might help people he would never meet, and he had done something that might cost him the only income keeping his family afloat. The two possibilities coexisted in his mind without resolution, and by the time he reached his stop, he had stopped trying to figure out which one would come true first. Mrs. Delgado was making breakfast when he let himself in. Lily was at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, eating cereal, and reading a book she had brought home from the school library. She looked up when he entered, and her face broke into the kind of smile that made everything else feel manageable. "Daddy, how was your job? Was the building really big? The biggest I've ever worked in. Did you see any ghosts?" Nathan laughed, despite his exhaustion. "No ghosts, just a lot of empty hallways and some machines that needed checking." He sat with her while she finished breakfast, listening to her talk about the book she was reading and the science project she was planning and the friend who had said something funny at lunch the day before. He absorbed every word, every gesture, every small moment of ordinary life, and felt something inside him settle into place. Whatever happened next, he had done what he could live with. That was enough. 23 floors above the ground in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Lake Michigan, Victoria Ashford began her morning at 6:45. She arrived before most of her executive team, a habit she had developed in her 20 seconds when she was still building the company from a small tech consultancy into the real estate and development empire it had become. At 32, she was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America, a fact that journalists loved to mention and that she found increasingly irrelevant. Money was a tool. Power was a responsibility. What mattered was what you built with both. Her assistant had laid out the morning briefings in their usual order: financial reports, market analysis, project updates, personnel summaries. Victoria worked through them with the focused efficiency that had become her trademark, approving expenditures and flagging concerns and dictating responses to messages that required personal attention. By 7:15, she had processed more information than most executives encountered in a full day. The incident report arrived in her inbox at 7:22. Victoria read it once, quickly, expecting a routine fire drill notification or a minor equipment issue that someone had escalated unnecessarily. Then she read it again, more slowly, and felt something cold settle in her chest. A Level 2 fire alert had been triggered at 4:37 that morning. The accompanying documentation included photographs of pressure gauges showing critical failures, video of falsified maintenance logs, and a detailed written summary identifying systemic problems with the fire suppression system covering the top 22 floors of her building. She had been in meetings yesterday in those offices. She had stood at windows on the 65th floor discussing quarterly projections while somewhere beneath her feet, a system designed to save her life was silently failing. The report had been filed by an overnight security guard named Nathan Cole. Victoria had never heard the name before, had no memory of ever seeing it on any document that crossed her desk. She pulled up his personnel file and found almost nothing. A temporary employee hired through an outside agency assigned to cover shifts that full-time staff refused to work. No photo on file. No emergency contact except a neighbor's phone number and the name of a 7-year-old daughter listed in the space reserved for dependent, a temporary worker, a night shift security guard, the kind of employee who existed in the margins of her company, invisible and interchangeable, doing work that kept the building functioning but rarely merited attention from anyone in the executive suite. This was the person who had found what her entire facilities management team had missed. She called her head of facilities management. He answered on the second ring, already audibly nervous, which told her he had seen the report too. "Miss Ashford, I just saw the report. I want to assure you that our fire systems are inspected quarterly by certified." "Stop." Victoria's voice was quiet, but something in it made the man on the other end of the line go silent immediately. "I'm looking at photographs of pressure gauges reading 40% below normal. I'm looking at maintenance logs with entries that appear to be falsified. I'm looking at documentation suggesting that the fire safety system in my building has been compromised for months, while people signed off on reports telling me everything was fine. Miss Ashford, I'm sure there's an explanation." "There is an explanation. Either your team failed to identify a critical safety issue, or they identified it and chose to cover it up. Neither option is acceptable." She paused, scrolling through the personnel file still open on her screen. This report was filed by a temporary overnight security guard, a man with no specialized training, no access to maintenance systems, no reason to be checking fire suppression equipment as part of his normal duties. He found a problem in one night that your entire department missed for months or ignored. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "I want a full investigation," Victoria continued. "Every maintenance record for the past year. Every technician who signed off on these inspections. Every manager who reviewed and approved their work on my desk by end of day." She hesitated, looking again at the sparse personnel file. "And I want to know more about this security guard, Nathan Cole, where he lives, what his background is, why he decided to risk his job by reporting something that everyone else told him to ignore." She ended the call and stood at her window, watching the morning light spread across the city below. Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon, calm and gray in the early hour, and the streets below were beginning to fill with the first commuters of the day. Somewhere down there, in a neighborhood she had probably never visited, a man she had never met was going home to his daughter after a night spent doing what her own employees had failed to do. Victoria Ashford had built her reputation on seeing opportunities others missed, on recognizing value where others saw only risk. She had taken a small technology consultancy and transformed it into one of the largest real estate development companies in the Midwest through sheer force of will and an ability to see patterns that others overlooked. She had negotiated deals that seemed impossible, identified properties that others had dismissed, built a fortune on the foundation of paying attention when everyone else was looking the other way. But she had missed this. She had trusted systems and reports and quarterly certifications, and she had almost missed the moment when all of it failed. She had delegated oversight to managers who had delegated to technicians who had delegated to paperwork. And somewhere along that chain of trust, the actual truth had gotten lost. It was a humbling realization for a woman who prided herself on control. The question now was what she was going to do about it. The address in Nathan Cole's file led to a 3-story brick building on the northwest side of the city, the kind of structure that had been middle-class housing 50 years ago and was now divided into cramped apartments filled with people stretching their budgets to the breaking point. Victoria's driver pulled the black sedan to the curb at 7:45 inches the morning, and she sat for a moment looking up at the building, trying to reconcile what she knew about the man inside with the surroundings he lived in. She had read his full background report during the drive. 41 years old, widowed 3 years ago, wife lost to cancer after an 18-month battle that had drained their savings and left him with medical debt he was still paying off. Sole custody of a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, former site supervisor at a construction company that had gone bankrupt. Since then, a series of temporary positions in security, warehouse work, delivery, driving, anything that paid enough to keep them housed and fed without requiring the kind of stable schedule that would make finding childcare impossible. Victoria had known poverty existed. She had seen the statistics, supported the charities, funded the initiatives. But sitting in her imported sedan, looking up at the water-stained bricks of Nathan Cole's apartment building, she realized she had never actually seen it. Not like this. Not with a name and a face and a daughter and a story. She got out of the car before she could talk herself out of it. The building had no doorman, no security system, just a front door with a broken lock that swung open when she pushed it. The hallway inside smelled of cooking grease and old carpet and something that might have been mildew from a leak that had never been properly addressed. The stairwell to the 3rd floor was lit by a single buzzing fluorescent that flickered every few seconds, casting strange shadows on walls that needed painting. Victoria climbed the stairs in heels that cost more than a month's rent in this building, suddenly aware of how absurd she must look, and found apartment 312 at the end of a narrow corridor lined with doors that had all seen better decades. She stood there for a moment, composing herself. Victoria Ashford did not get nervous. She had faced down hostile board members and aggressive investors and journalists determined to find scandal. But, standing in this dim hallway, about to knock on the door of a man who had done something she couldn't quite understand, she felt something unfamiliar, something that might have been uncertainty. She knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, light and quick, definitely not an adult. The door opened to reveal a girl of about 7, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that held both curiosity and weariness in equal measure. She was wearing pajamas with cartoon characters on them, and there was a smudge of what looked like jam at the corner of her mouth. "Hello," the girl said, looking Victoria up and down with the unself-conscious assessment that only children could manage. "Are you here to see my daddy?" Victoria found herself momentarily without words, which was not a sensation she experienced often. "Yes. Is he home?" "He just got back from work. He's really tired." The girl studied Victoria's face with an intensity that felt almost analytical, as if she were filing away details for later reference. "You're dressed really fancy. Are you from the government?" "No, I work at the building where your father was last night." Something shifted in the girl's expression, a flicker of protectiveness that made her seem older than her years. She straightened slightly, her small shoulders squaring as if preparing for confrontation. He didn't do anything wrong. He always does the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what he always tells me. Before Victoria could respond, a man appeared behind the girl, his hand settling gently on her shoulder. He was tall, with the kind of lean build that came from physical work rather than gym memberships, and his face showed the exhaustion of someone who had just finished a 12-hour night shift. But his eyes were alert, taking in Victoria's expensive clothes, her careful posture, the black sedan visible through the window at the end of the hall. "Lily, go finish your breakfast, please." "But Daddy, it's okay. I'll be right there." The girl retreated reluctantly, casting one more protective glance at Victoria before disappearing around a corner. Nathan Cole stepped into the doorway, not quite blocking the entrance, but making it clear that this was his space and she was not invited inside. "You're from Belmore Tower," he said. It wasn't a question. "I own Billionaire Tower." Victoria watched his face for a reaction, but found only a slight narrowing of his eyes, as if he were recalculating something. "I'm Victoria Ashford. I know who you are. Then you probably know why I'm here." Nathan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms in a gesture that might have been defensive or simply tired. "If you're here to tell me I'm fired for triggering that alert, you could have just called the temp agency. They would have handled it. I'm not here to fire you." Victoria paused, uncertain for the first time in longer than she could remember about how to proceed. "I'm here to understand why you did what you did. Every other person who saw that problem either missed it or ignored it. My maintenance staff, my building managers, 3 security guards before you who worked the same shift and walked past the same equipment. But you stopped. You documented it. You filed a report that you knew would probably cost you your job. Why?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face the way his daughter had. When he spoke, his voice was steady and without apology. "Because 5,000 people work in that building every day. Because if there was a fire and those sprinklers failed, people would die. Families would get phone calls like the one I got 3 years ago. Except it would be worse because it didn't have to happen." He paused and something shifted in his expression. "And because my daughter asked me this morning if I saw any ghosts at work last night, I want to be able to look her in the eye and tell her that I did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when no one asked me to." Victoria felt the words settle into her chest with unexpected weight. She had heard countless presentations about corporate ethics, sat through endless seminars on stakeholder responsibility and reputational management. She had read articles about corporate culture and employee engagement and all the carefully constructed frameworks that business schools taught about doing the right thing. But she had never heard anyone explain moral choice in terms this simple. A father wanting to look his daughter in the eye. There was no calculation in what he'd done, no expectation of reward, no careful weighing of personal benefit against personal risk. He had simply seen something wrong and decided he couldn't live with himself if he walked away from it. It was the kind of integrity that couldn't be bought or taught or manufactured through training programs. "The pressure problem wasn't isolated," she said finally, her voice quieter than she'd intended. "My team finished their preliminary investigation an hour ago. The fire suppression system has been compromised for at least 5 months. Falsified maintenance records. Deferred repairs that should have been mandatory. Technicians signing off on inspections they never performed. If you hadn't filed that report, we might not have found it until something catastrophic happened." She took a breath, feeling the weight of the admission. "You potentially saved a lot of lives last night, Mr. Cole, including mine. My office is on the 67th floor. Nathan absorbed this information without visible reaction, though something flickered in his eyes that might have been surprise. "So, what happens now?" "That depends on you," Victoria reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a business card, the heavy cream-colored stock that she reserved for people who mattered. I'm offering you a position, not overnight security, a permanent role on my corporate safety team, reporting directly to the executive level. Your job would be to find the problems that everyone else misses, to ask the questions that make people uncomfortable, to be exactly what you were last night, except with the authority and resources to back it up. She extended the card toward him. Nathan looked at it, but didn't take it. The salary is $160,000 annually, full benefits, including health coverage for you and your daughter. Victoria paused, watching his face, and a signing bonus that would let you move out of this apartment into something with a working elevator and a lock on the front door. Nathan's expression was unreadable. He looked at the card in Victoria's hand, but didn't take it, his eyes moving from the embossed text to her face and back again. Why? You don't know anything about me except that I made trouble for your company. I know everything I need to know. Victoria held his gaze steadily, willing him to understand that she meant every word. I know that when you were alone at 3:00 the morning in a building full of problems that weren't your responsibility, you chose to act. I know that you documented everything carefully and filed a proper report instead of just disappearing at the end of your shift. I know that you did the right thing knowing it would probably cost you the job you needed to feed your daughter. She lowered the card slightly but didn't withdraw it. That kind of integrity isn't something I can teach or buy. It either exists in a person or it doesn't. It exists in you, and I want to invest in it. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the apartment, Nathan could hear Lily moving around, probably trying to get close enough to listen without being obvious about it. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street below. Victoria stood in her expensive coat in the doorway of his cramped apartment, and for a moment, the distance between their worlds seemed both impossibly vast and strangely insignificant. I need to think about it, he said finally. Victoria nodded as if this was exactly the response she had expected from a man who didn't make decisions impulsively. Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire. She placed the card on the narrow ledge beside the door next to a small potted plant that looked like it needed water. And Mr. Cole, whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you did matters, not just to the people who work in my building. To me personally, I've spent 10 years building systems and structures and trusting reports that told me everything was fine. Last night, you showed me that all of it means nothing if no one is willing to see what's actually there. She turned and walked back down the hallway toward the stairs, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. Behind her, she heard the soft click of the door closing. And somehow, that small sound felt more significant than any of the deals she had closed or the acquisitions she had finalized. It felt like a door she had opened in herself, a question she had finally allowed herself to ask. She was almost at the stairwell when she heard the door open again. Miss Ashford. Victoria turned. Nathan was standing in the hallway, the business card in his hand. My daughter has a school presentation next Tuesday, Parent Observation Day. She's been working on it for 2 weeks, and she asked me last night if I could try to be there. I'll make sure you have the day off. Nathan nodded slowly, something in his posture shifting, relaxing for the first time since he'd opened the door. Then I'll see you Monday morning. He didn't smile, but there was something in his expression that looked like the beginning of trust. 3 weeks later, Nathan sat in a conference room on the 40th floor of Billionaire Tower, reviewing safety reports from one of Victoria's development projects in Seattle. Lily's school presentation had gone well, her science project about the water cycle earning the second highest score in her class. She had introduced Nathan to her teacher as my dad, who found the broken fire thing in the really tall building, and the teacher had smiled politely while clearly having no idea what the child was talking about. The transition hadn't been seamless. There were managers who resented Nathan's sudden authority, employees who viewed him with suspicion, Meetings where he could feel the silent judgment of people who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, only to watch an overnight security guard leapfrog them entirely. But Victoria had made it clear from his first day that his position came with her full support, and that anyone who had a problem with his presence could take it up with her directly. No one had taken her up on the offer. The fire suppression issue had been repaired within 72 hours of Nathan's report. The maintenance company responsible for the falsified inspections had been terminated and was now facing regulatory investigation. 3 of Victoria's building managers had been quietly let go, and the remaining staff had received pointed reminders about the importance of accurate reporting. The story had never reached the press. There was no scandal, no public relations crisis, just a quiet restructuring that would never make headlines but might someday save lives. Victoria had changed too. Though she would have been reluctant to admit it to anyone who asked, she spent more time in the operational areas of her buildings now, talking to maintenance workers and security staff and cleaning crews, learning the names of people she had previously encountered only as line items in personnel reports. She had instituted a new anonymous reporting system for safety concerns with a direct line to her personal review. She had started reading the night shift logs herself, looking for the details that might matter, the observations that might have been overlooked. She told herself it was good business practice. She told herself it was risk management. But in the quiet moments, when she was honest with herself, she knew it was something more. She had met a man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and he had done the right thing anyway. It had changed something in her understanding of what her power was for. Lily adjusted to the new apartment faster than Nathan had expected. The building had an elevator that worked and a lobby with a security guard who knew her name. She had her own room now, painted the shade of purple she had chosen herself, with a window that looked out on a small park where she could watch other children playing. She still asked about the building where her father worked, still wanted to know if he had found any more broken things that needed fixing. One evening, about a month after Nathan had started his new position, Lily sat next to him on their new couch and asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, that lady who came to our old apartment, the one in the fancy clothes, is she your boss now?" "Yes, her name is Miss Ashford. She seemed kind of scary, but also kind of nice." Lily considered this for a moment. "Is she a good boss?" Nathan thought about the question more carefully than he might have a month ago. "She's trying to be. I think she's learning how to be a good boss, learning how to see things she didn't see before." Nathan put his arm around his daughter and pulled her close. Sometimes people get so used to looking at the big picture that they forget to notice the small details, the things that seem ordinary but actually matter the most. Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Like when I forgot to water my plant for 2 weeks because I was thinking about my science project and then it almost died." Nathan laughed. "Exactly like that. Miss Ashford should get a plant. Then she would remember to pay attention to the little things. I'll suggest it." They sat together in the quiet of their new home, watching the evening light fade over the park below. Somewhere across the city, in a glass tower that reached toward the sky, Victoria Ashford was working late, reading reports and reviewing plans and trying to see the things she had missed before. And somewhere in between them, in the space that connected a billionaire and a night shift security guard, a single act of integrity had changed the shape of what was possible. Nathan had taken a job no one wanted. He had walked into a building full of problems that weren't his responsibility. He had seen something wrong and chosen to act, not because anyone was watching, not because he expected reward, but because his daughter had asked him once why he always picked the hardest jobs, and he wanted to give her an answer that was worth believing. The answer, it turned out, was simpler than he had expected. Because someone had to. Because he could. Because in the end, the only person we have to face in the mirror is ourselves. And the only legacy that matters is the one we leave in the choices we make when no one is looking. The morning after Nathan Cole filed his report, a little girl in a cramped apartment told a stranger that her father always did the right thing, even when it was hard. She was 7 years old, and she didn't know anything about fire suppression systems or corporate liability or the complex machinery of wealth and power. But she knew her father. She knew what he stood for. She knew that when he came home tired from work, he came home with his integrity intact. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only inheritance that truly mattered. And high above the city, in a building that had almost forgotten what it meant to pay attention to the people who kept it running, a woman who had everything was beginning to learn what it looked like to see clearly. The view from the 67th floor was spectacular. But the view from the 3rd floor of a walk-up apartment, watching a father and daughter laugh together in the evening light, was something money could never buy. Both of them, in their own way, had finally found what they were looking for. And the building between them, that tower of glass and steel and human ambition, stood a little straighter, knowing that somewhere in its corridors someone was watching, someone who would always choose to.